it's good to keep a diary. As soon as you can start writing, age 6, keep a diary. I mean, I had a little diary when I was a kid, and then I had a real little diary, right? Well, now this would be one day right now. The one thing is good, I was a better writer. I don't think they even teach cursive writing now. You do printing or you work on a computer nowadays with typing. But these are my first diaries from the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, and then we go over here to the 90s and the 2000s. And when I got to 2000, the millennium, I thought, oh, I hope I'm going to live a bit longer because I don't have any more space left because we've got windows and we've got cupboards and we've got what am I going to do? So I'm actually piling them up now. And I'm afraid, I always have a diary beside me, but I'm afraid it's become less. I'm not doing it as well because I'm putting my tweets and Facebook and onto the computer now, like most people do it. But one thing I did in the 60s, before I started writing books, I used to write a column called Hancock's Half Column. Nobody will know now, unless you're very old and you're English, why I called it Hancock's Half Column. Because I was a tailor and I married David Hancock. So Hancock, the only Hancock I knew was Hancock's Half Hour, which was an English radio show done by Tony Hancock. And so I called my half column. But you know, this was done for the shopper in Victoria and the Victorian paper. And they put a picture, my picture had all these animals on my head. Oh, not that one. Well, that must be the early ones had animals on my head, I thought. This one looks a bit odd. Hancock's half column articles, May 69. Okay, that's when I met you. We taught at Monterey Elementary School. I'm sure I had animals on my head with a picture because I was associated, but it definitely was called Hancock's Half Column. But it was not a half column, it was like a double column because I can't, as you know, I can't kind of talk short, I talk long. Yeah, I really want somebody to put them in a museum or something because, you know, this was the writing. I didn't have them on a computer. And so I had all the animals in the classroom during the school holidays, but then after that, in the summertime I would go traveling with David and would be those would be 1985. Oh, this is Tell Me Grandmother. That's another book we have to go on because you don't have to talk about my stories, my animal stories, because you may not have wild animals, but you can talk and write about your own stories. Like, for example, here is my father, before he died, wanted me to write his story, and his information and my diaries are all here, and his diaries are all here. And I remember that because my great-grandparents were looked after on Rottnest Island, which is an island, a recreational island now, near Fremantle, Western Australia, where I was born. And my grandfather, who I never met, he was in charge of the Aboriginal convicts on Rottnest Island. So this is Dad's story, Dad, and the tapes. And he wanted to talk about the convicts. They were Aboriginal convicts. Just imagine them coming from the desert of Australia and stealing a sheep or killing a sheep, which is just an animal for food, and they were plonked in jail, and these concrete buildings, these concrete cells. And so I've got all these tapes, little on tapes like this, her dad's story. I don't know whether I'm ever going to. I've written stories about them. Passport to Adventure. That's my dad. And actually, if you come into my bathroom, I have my dad in my life all the time. My dad on Rottnest Island was taught the convicts, the Aboriginal convicts were given Sunday afternoon off, and they would take my dad when he was 5 years old, on their shoulders, and they would be loose. It's an island, so they couldn't get away, so they would have Sunday off out of their cell, and they would taught Dad swimming on the salt lakes of Rottnest Island, and they had their Aboriginal weapons, and they would shoot quokkas. They're little marsupials, like miniature kangaroos, and they would be fed. That would be the bait for getting crayfish, to bait the crayfish pots. And that's what my dad did when he grew up. He was a grocer for a while, but when I grew up, we would go over to Rottnest Island, and we had 2 boats there. We had 1 boat there in 2 different places, and that's what Dad would do. And that's my favourite picture of Dad in his Greek fisherman's cap, and his biggest crayfish. You call them lobster over here in North America. And that would be taking it out of his pot. And he did that for the rest of his life. And here is his biggest fish. And this is it. Dad and Mum caught that fish. It's taller than my dad, and it's a 300-pound groper. And Mum and Dad fished with a hand line, like kids do on the end of boats, end of jetties now, with a hand line. And Mum and Dad were in a 14-foot little dinghy about 6 miles out in the Indian Ocean and west of Western Australia. And Dad said it was like being taken to Africa. I got on my line went taut, and what do I do? What was it? And this, whatever it was on the end of the line, was dragging us to Africa. A little bit of exaggeration there, but it was towards Africa, the Indian Ocean. And 2 or 3 hours later, after 2 pairs of gloves, he said, he managed to get this huge fish alongside the boat. You couldn't put it in the boat; it was longer than the boat. I mean, it's taller than he is, and he had to rope its mouth open, because so he put it alongside of the boat to get it back to shore, and he put the mouth open because if water went in there, it was, he could tip over the boat. And they were in their 80s when they did that. So Dad's story I haven't written yet, but the notes are there, the diaries are there, the tapes are there. But you kids, if the kids are watching this, I hope they are, then you can write your grandfather's story, your grandmother's story. And 2 of the children that were in the class with you in 1969 at Monterey Elementary in Oak Bay, we not only wrote about animals in the classroom, but 2 of those kids, they brought, that was where I learnt, and they wrote with their mother and their father their story. And that was Marilyn and Elizabeth. So we're going to go back into the living room, and we're going to see The Ring, which is the story that was first called Tell Me Grandmother, that came also from that class in 1969. So we sure did a lot of learning to write in those days. And maybe somebody will read that story and become a film producer, as you did.